PWA, which is pSConfig WebAdmin. Now, this is the web-based interface that Andy mentioned that that you can use to configure your meshes. Let's see. So as Andy mentioned, one part of perfSONAR is pSConfig, which allows you to configure like groups of hosts, test specs, different tools that you want to use, test scheduling, and archivers for the results, as well as configuring visualization, dashboards, and that sort of thing. So pSConfig will handle all of that. It is simply a specific like JSON format, just plain text file that you can build. And here's an example of some of the. This is just a generic example of what the pSConfig JSON looks like. It's not difficult to manage, particularly, but before PWA we had to manage these manually, which is it's a little more of a learning curve. You have to know what all the variables are called, stuff like that. It's also more difficult to like collaborate on a configuration. So say you have a team that you want to help manage your configuration, and if it's just like a flat file, it's difficult to like figure out who's going to distribute it or who's going to maintain it. Or some people would have GitHub repos with their configs and then cron jobs pulling down the updates, periodically. But with PWA, there's a web-based GUI to set all this up, and so you don't need to know as much about what's going on behind the scenes. It's a multi-user application, so if you want to collaborate with someone, you just create a user account for them and allow them to log in and work on the config. Let's see, and it also has a publishing component that generates the pSConfig JSON in a couple different ways, depending on how you want to deploy things. So here's this. You'll probably see this diagram a lot today, but so pSConfig is the component that handles the configuration, and then PWA here manages it, and then pSConfig interacts with pScheduler, which actually handles the test scheduling. But in Mad Dash, the grid view that Andy showed earlier also pulls from pSConfig. So PWA was introduced in perfSONAR 4.1 in 2018. We haven't had a whole lot of trainings on it, so kind of assuming, and we have a bunch of new people, so I'm kind of assuming like not much knowledge from viewers here, but if I need to clarify anything or speed up or slow down, let me know. So as I mentioned, PWA is a web interface for managing the pSConfig format, and it's got a user-friendly interface and facilitates collaboration. It also has some access control, so you can have regular users and you can have super admins who have access to everything. You can also have people who can only manage certain assets, certain hosts, certain host groups, certain configs, etc. So the sections in PWA are modeled after sections of a pSConfig file. Configs, which are where everything gets pulled together, all the host information, all the test specs, all the scheduling, all the archiving, all that gets pulled together in that place. And then there's a host section, which has metadata about the hosts and things like addresses and ports they're running things on and things like that. Host groups allow you to create a grouping that you can use, so say to define what group of what group of hosts you want to be included in your tests. And then test specs are where you configure what type of test you're running and whatever parameters you need to go along with it. And in the GUI, each of these pieces can be reused across multiple meshes. So which makes it a lot easier if you have a certain group of hosts that you want to include in several different meshes, like that makes this a lot easier to do. There's also an auto config feature. This isn't new of this release, but it's kind of a little lesser known feature, I think, so it's worth highlighting. And there's a special config URL available per host, and the idea with that is that you can point each host at its URL, and PWA gives it a list of all the tests and all the host groups and all the archives and everything that it needs to participate in, and doesn't include all the information about the other hosts that's unnecessary. So, one advantage to this is if you have a host that's already pointed at your PWA instance, you can add it to new configs, new host groups, and it'll just automatically join them then because it'll get updated. It's dynamically generated. New in PWA 4.3, the biggest thing is a new archive section, which allows you to create reusable archiver definitions. And you can apply these at the host or config level. We also now have support for non-Esmond archivers. This is something that pScheduler and pSConfig have supported for some time, but prior to 4.3, PWA only supported Esmond, which is our internally maintained archive. So the new ones that are supported now are RabbitMQ, which we use a lot for getting test data into ELK stacks and things of that nature, which Andy will be talking about later. Raw JSON allows you to create like kind of an arbitrary config, so you could theoretically support third-party archivers just by crafting the correct JSON. So that's the more advanced feature, a little bit harder to get it to work. We also have updated some tests and tool options, some stability improvements. In particular, things were not getting updated in the local host database from the lookup service as well as it could have been, so that's been improved. We have an experimental plugin mechanism that allows users to transform or filter the final pSConfig structure before outputting it. You can do just anything you want to it, basically. So, so once you have a config, let's actually hold off on this. Because we're going to do a little demo in a second here. Yeah, let's do the demo and then we'll do this part. So quick demo, going to build a little mesh in with PWA. I've got some parts of it already created. I've got a couple of test specs here, some host groups, a few hosts configured, and then I've got one config already set up with a latency test here. So the pSConfig output that it generates looks like this. And so here's where the pSConfig add stuff comes in. So I've also got let me show you a mad dash instance running here. You can see there are no dashboards. And I'm just going to go ahead and add the URL for our new demo dashboard so we can get it to show up. And it'll take a few minutes for it to pick that up.
Michael, if you're stalling for time, I've got a question for you that came up just before the demo.
Go for it, yeah.
So let's see. Adam wants to know, he had issues when he used RabbitMQ with nodes freezing and needing the services restarted. Has the group had any issues with this, and has it been fixed?
I haven't seen that. I'd be curious some of the specifics of what might have been going on there. It's possible the queues were filling up and weren't being emptied, or maybe there's a backlog locally. Yeah, I haven't seen that myself, though.
Thanks, Michael.
certainly talk about that more later on. Thanks. Let's see, where was it? Okay. So now let's see if it shows up. Yeah, it takes a couple minutes to show up. Okay, so now we have our perfSONAR Day demo grid here, and I'm using some hosts that are already in a mesh together, so it looks like they already have data, but it's sort of cheating. So I wanted to give people an idea of what the process looks like to go through and create additional tests and that sort of thing. So we already have. Let's see. I already created. Here's what a paying test spec looks like. So the tester interval, the typically like packet count is important. Packet interval. I'm just going to accept the defaults for this, and I also already have a paying host group set up. So at the config layer, right now we only have this one latency test, but we can go ahead and add a new test, which we'll just call it like ping one. Oops. Make sure we have the right service type selected. Service type here is mesh. The disjoint is also supported. That's all that we support at the moment. You can do a lot with just those two things. Okay, so here I'm selecting the ping host group. There's 4 hosts in it, which is showing me here. And then the ping test spec, which I just showed you. And then we'll click update. And now if I look at this, so here's the pSConfig JSON again. Notice before I refresh here, there's one test defined, and now we should have 2. Now we have a ping test as well, and another schedule. So this should show up in Mandash here in a few minutes. So we'll come back to that. We can go ahead and add some additional. Let's go ahead and add a throughput test. The throughput parameters look like this. You can control the tool, protocol, the interval between tests. So that's in seconds. So some of these are more important than others. The duration of the test. You can set a window size and amount of slip if you want. Slip, if you're not sure what to do, leave slip blank and it will do something sane. So that's what I recommend there. Some tests also have some advanced test parameters available. So we said type of service bit or something like that. For most people, these aren't really necessary, but if there's something you're looking for and you can't find it, I would suggest looking under the advanced parameters. I already have a throughput host group too. So we can go ahead and now add our. Yeah, we can go ahead and add our new throughput test. That should be updated. So let's see if we get a throughput test in our config here. We have new groups, new host groups, a new test, new schedules, a new tasks that tie them all together again. So again, if you're building it manually, you'd have to figure out how to write all this out. It's well documented. It's not that hard to do, but it's a lot easier to click on things. I may need to restart Mandash to get that stuff to show up. while we wait on that, I can let's go ahead and add a. Well, let's look at a couple other things. So in the config section here, this is kind of a really important page, because this is where you tie together all the different components to make a working config. So prior to 4.3, the new version, we had just a central MA URLs, which you can provide. It just assumes it's an Esmond archive, because that was all that was supported at the time. This is still here. You can still use it if you want to just easily add one Esmond archive. But if you want to add a central archive, let's add a Rabbit archive. Then here, I'll show you. Let's put a new archive, call it Rabbit. Again, we often use Rabbit to feed into Elk, but there's a lot of other things you could do with it. I think I had a there's some other parameters here that you can also set, but you don't need all of them. We'll call this our RabbitMQ central archive. So if we go look at the config here, now under central archive MAs, we can select our new Rabbit archive, and now all of the tests in this mesh will submit their results to the RabbitMQ archive. Now that we've done that, you can also see that in the pSConfig JSON. The archiver type is RabbitMQ, and the details we provided. Let's see if Mad Dash is picked up. Didn't do it. That's interesting. Sorry about this. I thought that Mad Dash would have picked it up by now. So, let's try that. Starting the Mad Dash agent. I may mess something up there. So a couple other things. Start Mad Dash again. Yeah. Okay. So a couple other things we can look at. There's also an option to force archiving to the MA on each individual endpoint. This is something that's kind of not a typical use case, but you could do it. And then if you do, then all four of these hosts are going to try to archive to their own archives as well. But you can also accomplish that on the host level. If we look at this host, you can tell it to use its local MA, and now we just have that happening for the one host rather than the whole mesh. Let's see if Mad Dash has picked me. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now we have a ping grid and a throughput grid as well. And we can also click through on these, and we see the test results on the graphs. Yeah, this is just a basic Mad Dash install. Just loading, but so these are some of the things you can do with PWA. Let me show you the host autoconfig. So we have it give us the autoconfig URL. You can see it's hostname /PWA/pub/auto/ whatever the host name actually is. Then this is what tells that host all the tests that it needs to participate in, like regardless of which meshes they're actually in. So yeah, if you were to use this to for each host, if you were to use their auto URL rather than using, you wouldn't have to use separate config URLs for all the different configs the host participates in. That's pretty much all I wanted to demo. Is how you can add a config to Mandash or to a test point. It's just this pSConfig remote add with the URL. For test point nodes, you pretty much always want configure archives because that tells it to actually write to the measurement archives. And same is true for the autoconfig. So that was it for my intro. Take any questions.
So Michael, there aren't actually specific questions. The one question about the RabbitMQ was addressed by Mark in the background. So yeah, nothing in the chat.
Okay, great. Well, if there's desire to have different archivers added to PWA, we're going to be adding more to it. But if people have feedback for us moving forward on that, you could kind of shape the direction that takes potentially. So certainly let us know if there are things you would like to see added, and definitely give PWA a spin because it might make some things easier for you.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael. So next up, we actually have a break that goes to the top of the hour. So just make sure you're back, when